Check out today's piece of Otaku Daikun fan art. Hey, it's me, or in this case, Lieutenant O Daikun. I'm in a fan-made Fate universe, teaching students about plasma-encased bullets rather than magecraft. It does make sense that, in the future, mages would have to snuggle up to technology in some capacity. Thank you so much, Jesse. Welcome back to Otaku Daikun, Dai here. It's no secret that I absolutely love the style of anime from the 80s and 90s. Bubblegum Crisis, Dirty Pair Flash, Slayers, Evangelion, Gunbuster, Plastic Little, the list goes on and on. A lot's happened since these shows came out, namely the introduction of digital coloring rather than hand-painted cells. For a time in the early 2000s, anime really struggled to replicate the quality visuals they once had with analog technology and actual film stock. If you have the original film prints, for instance, you can easily scan any of those retro anime into HD or 4K with amazing results, and they'll look unquestionably better than those earlier digital works. I'd say it was around the time of KyoAni rising to prominence that we started seeing digital anime finally catch up to where the retro stuff left off. This was accompanied by the boom of moe aesthetic, and with it came a gradual shift in art style. Of course, all artists have their own unique style, but by and large, you can observe an average shift in the way that anime characters look. It's tough to describe. Perhaps anime now looks more rounded and less sharp. Ever since this transition, I've wondered to myself if we'll ever see an anime that uses all the modern tools of digital HD animation, but stylistically draws its worlds and characters the way they did back before digital cells were even a thing. Now, obviously, anime is going to look a certain way based on the technology that was used to make it. Film simply looks different than digital cells, such as the natural flaws imprinted from actual ink and paint. These can add a lot of character to the finished work. That said, there are also some independent artists who specialize in reimagining modern anime with a retro style, but that's more of an experiment than seeing a retro style genuinely revived in the industry. Some anime have stood the test of time to really reflect the industry as it changed. Inuyasha is one of them. For its first couple of seasons, Inuyasha was animated traditionally, before ultimately shifting to digital. I'd argue that the show permanently suffered for it. I'm sure budget was a factor, but the series started with some truly captivating visuals, only to lose that spark by the end. Even Yashahime, made with current HD technology, still doesn't look as good as it once did. Then we've got reboots and such. I made a video a while back on Sorceress Stabber Orphan, and how its recent remake looked cheap compared to a lot of the older show's visuals. It was a combination of budget and style that made the difference. Orphan stopped looking like an immersive dark fantasy, and more like some bright and goofy isekai. The 90s classic Slayers anime saw not a reboot, but a sequel many years after its first 3 seasons. This one I'd say made a much more earnest effort at capturing the original's appeal, but it still lacked that sharp 90s spunk. I feel like if they got the same team of artists and tried a lot harder, they could have totally nailed the aesthetic. The hard thing is that I can never tell if that's what these studios are really going for in the first place. The most irritating example comes from the Langrisser games. Langrisser is a series of strategy JRPGs that released back in the SNES days, featuring the art of Satoshi Urushihara. His work is a staple among 80s and 90s anime, but when it came time for this game series to get remade on modern consoles, as well as a mobile version, entirely new artists were hired to make their own versions. Between the original and both modern adaptations, we have 3 completely different styles, which is irritating because the console release gives you the option of using Satoshi's classic style instead. If that's the case, why not just stick with his designs all the way? It could be for a number of reasons. Maybe Satoshi's gotten expensive in his tenure, or they just wanted to try something new. The worst case scenario is that they feel Satoshi's art style is too old, and that Langrisser wouldn't be popular with modern fans without an overhaul. That would just wash away any hope I have of a modern anime nailing that retro vibe. It's got me wondering if the industry is even capable of recapturing the magic of retro OVAs. Thankfully, there do seem to be some promising examples we can look at. Now, I haven't had the chance to watch them myself, but people have recommended Gundam Unicorn. Judging by the trailer, I've gotta say they get real fucking close to what I'm looking for. CG mechs aside, the human characters do retain qualities from older artists. It's not quite at the point where I'd prefer it over physical cell animation, though. Then there's Space Battleship Yamato 2199. The CG is depressing, but the characters are made as a nice middle ground between the 1970s original and what we're used to seeing now. Now, up to a certain point, the Evangelion rebuild films did their best to straight up remake the original series. For the first two films, we had many iconic scenes reconstructed with absolute fidelity, ignoring the CG Evas and Angels anyway. Aside from the second two films, which go off in a totally different direction, I'd say they do a decent job at capturing the same appeal. Atmospherically, though, it does not match how eerie and isolating the end of Evangelion was during instrumentality. I'll touch upon why I think that is later. Gurren Lagann and Kill la Kill are both made by the same creative team transitioning from Gainax to Studio Trigger. When making these shows, the animators implemented a lot of older techniques while using HD technology. Things like particle explosions were drawn by hand, with an intentionally messy quality that helps keep the old-school texture of retro anime. While their character designs aren't exactly retro, I can sort of imagine how they'd look if they were made before the digital era. Another decent example is Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card. Much like Slayers, the classic CCS was revived for a long-awaited sequel. You can see a bit of modernization with the design. Sakura's eyes and face are ever so slightly rounder, and there's a larger emphasis on shiny highlights compared to the original. That aside, and you kinda have to just sit down and watch it to understand, but you'll notice that there's still a filmic quality to it. It's almost like there's a subtle film grain. Either way, it made the 17-year gap between seasons feel relatively seamless. A more peculiar example comes from the Monogatari series, specifically an opening to Season 2, which parodies 80s anime. It does some things that I absolutely love and wish more anime would implement. The hand-drawn lens flares look really nice, but one thing you don't see every day are the bloom effects on the water. On old-school film, you would create effects like this by letting light spill through during the actual shot. It lent a magical quality to older animations, and as far as I'm concerned, Studio Shaft got the same vibe in HD. There's a nifty part where the filter lines scroll across the screen, showing the transition between modern and retro styles. In this specific case, the actual Monogatari style is far more appealing, but it's really nice to know that a studio can straight up mimic the classics when it wants to. By far, my favorite anime to incorporate a retro art style is Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress. It's perhaps one of the most underrated anime of all time, at least I think so, so if you haven't seen it yet, don't sleep on it. It employs character designs from Haruhiko Mikimoto, the legendary artist behind Gunbuster, and perhaps more famously, Macross, Do You Remember Love? It's the perfect evolution of a retro art style being used with modern animation techniques in a way that refuses to compromise on either. It really helps that this was a high-budget production, and not some cheap knockoff like Orphan. I honestly can't gush about this anime enough, and the fact that its OVA films, The Battle of Unato, have yet to release on Western Blu-ray is an absolute sin. Netflix is an evil hoarder of great stuff. Still waiting on that, and the final Violet Evergarden movie for my collection. I can't completely hate on Netflix, though. They have the balls to distribute the new Bastard remake in this current woke climate, after all. The original Bastard is about as classic as it gets, and while this new one could use some better production values, it does an awful lot to impress me. I think the only thing you really need to convince yourself to watch this one is to check out the opening animation. Seeing Dark Schneider conjure explosions to an angsty Cold Rain song is kick-ass. In this case, what impresses me more than the art style is more the fidelity to the original story and themes. Bastard is unapologetically juvenile with its lewdness and violence, and thankfully that same attitude is carried over here. That said, I do feel it's still worth checking out the classic OVA, even though it doesn't tell the full story. It may not be the most effective narrative adaptation, but it really nails the dark fantasy look in a way that the new one just doesn't. Literal darkness is a key component of its emotional tone. The original OVA uses a lot of black, negative space that helps isolate yourself from the real world and feel like you're actually in an old castle lit only by lanterns. it's this really deep blackness that really helped out Evangelion as well. A lot of digital anime tends to be way too bright, ruining the cold, alienating feel of dark fantasy and eerie sci-fi. Personally, I feel like modern anime studios, if they really try hard enough and don't skimp on the budget, can definitely replicate retro anime's stylistic qualities, or at the very least, blend them into an equally vibrant equivalent. The biggest reason this doesn't happen is because the professionals who made those retro designs no longer lead these new projects. What I describe as 80s and 90s anime may very well just be a collection of individual artists who dominated those decades. I find it fascinating to picture what some of today's art styles would look like if they were forced to use traditional techniques. Maybe we'd start associating Violet Evergarden and Attack on Titan with retro anime. I mean, that's gonna happen eventually, but by then, the 80s and 90s are gonna seem like real dinosaurs. It's a shame, too, because I often wind up talking to people online about what a modern Xenogears remake would look like. That could be cool to see attempted with, perhaps, the style of Xenosaga or Xenoblade. But honestly, what I dream about is a full, comprehensive anime series for Xenogears using the exact same art used for the game's cutscenes. Given how atrocious the Xenosaga anime wound up being, I still fear that such an adaptation will never be possible, even if I could convince someone to do it. Either way, I love seeing new art forms and discussing them here on the channel. Going into the comments, let me know what your favorite retro anime are. Would you want to see them be remade? In reverse, what modern anime would look cool if reimagined into a more retro style? Assuming they did it justice, would you prefer such a version? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
Hey guys, I want to go ahead and give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, C. James Torley, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Freebrick, Cosmonaut, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Logan Pasquale, Caitlin P, Vladimir Rovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.